Going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the digital media threat landscape. We're going to talk about what are the criminals after, what are the bad guys after, that is, which vulnerabilities are they trying to exploit. Thank you. And then the various approaches that digital media teams should use to manage the evolving threat on the web. And then ultimately, what role should you be asking your network service provider to play? I'm not sure everyone got Dan's memo this morning, but this is not supposed to be a product pitch. So I'm going to do my best to talk to you about some stuff that is really happening out there. But just for a minute, I want to establish my credibility and our credibility in the space. So I'm Bill Wohnoutka. I work for Level 3 Communications. I've done that for the last 17 years. It's been a big commitment for me personally. And I'm proud to show you some of the stats we have up here today. We are able to monitor over 70% of the global internet traffic. We're looking for malicious activity, constantly looking for malicious activity out there. We handle and see over 1.3 billion security events every day. So that's on our combination of our enterprise infrastructure, our CDN infrastructure, our DNS infrastructure, and our managed services and firewalls, as well as our internet infrastructure. There's over 45 plus billion net flow sessions that we collect per day, and we use those and crunch those in big data Hadoop clusters, and are actually able to get actionable intelligence out of those. That's something we've been doing since 2006. And really one of the areas where we distinguish ourselves is tracking the command and control centers on the internet. So we are keeping track of over 1,000 C2s at any given time. Our goal is not necessarily to look at every infected machine, but to really understand who's out there infecting machines and keep track of where those folks are moving, because they're constantly on the go as well. And today we respond to and mitigate over 22 DDoS attacks. I think that number is growing. We've recently launched our DDoS mitigation service and our Network Protect service into the market, and we'll continue to see more attacks as we roll those services out. So I think the first thing you have to ask yourself as you try to understand what your position should be in the digital media world is, who's attacking me? Why am I being attacked is obviously the next question, but who is attacking ends up being very important. The two most prolific attackers in the media and entertainment industry today are hacktivists, and these would be organizations such as Anonymous, which made a name for itself by launching high-profile DDoS attacks publicly. And then, surprisingly, organized crime is increasingly targeting media and entertainment companies with very sophisticated attacks. What's kind of funny about the organized crime space, it's not funny at all actually, what's kind of scary about the organized crime space, I didn't want to make this a scare presentation, but they're incredibly well organized and incredibly adept at recruiting people into their organizations. So just like we look at the venture capital community and say this is a group of people that can attract some of the best talent in the world, we are seeing very well organized criminal companies spring up and be very focused on attacking different elements of the enterprise space. Nation states have been less of a threat if you discount all of the hyperbole around the Sony attack over the winter and the theft of the interview. But nation states are actually pretty relevant in some cases because they're actually funding a lot of the organized crime syndicates that are getting involved in these. So they are setting an environment where there's a market for organized crime to sell their services. And then finally, insiders remain the ultimate threat. We have no controls to protect against insiders. We haven't seen a ton of insider threat that's materialized into significant loss yet, but it's the hardest one to protect against. So what are they after? It's incredibly important to understand which of your assets they're looking for. In the content space, clearly piracy becomes a huge opportunity. The opportunity to release your assets and your content, to sell those on the black market, to trade those assets, and ultimately to create embarrassment for your company as well. But there's an awful lot of critical theft that happens and that media companies are exposed to. And I would just start by saying that the risks that you have as an e-commerce provider, your cardholder data and your customer records, your ERP platform, where you may have intellectual property. More importantly, you may have business plans and legal documents that control your relationships with a very complicated ecosystem that could be exposed. Your test and development environments, certainly getting access to those would give the criminals an incredible place to start to incubate an attack within your own organization, within your own software and code. Your employee data and their health information is absolutely of critical value. I understand that today a credit card number is worth about 25 cents on the internet. A social security number is worth $5. So incredible value is stored in your employee records there. Extortion and ransomware have become real. The ability to extort money from enterprises has risen significantly. So we're actually seeing companies pay smaller extortion fees rather than deal with the eradication of the attack. So $50,000 to $100,000 regularly being paid today to avoid having to actually mitigate the threat. DDoS is something I think we're all familiar with. DDoS has become relatively common. In fact, in 2013, we saw many attacks that were over 100 gigabits per second, with the largest attack over 300 gigs in 2013. We're now seeing attacks regularly raised in the 400 gigabit per second and larger range. These are increasingly complex things to defend against, but I think what makes them even more serious is that while you're being attacked, all of your focus goes into that attack, and you're in fact disrupted from focusing on what might actually be the real target of the attack. And then finally, malware distribution through your services, through your servers, through servers that you run in a hosting environment, through servers in your CDN. This is something that you want to constantly be sure that you're taking account of. So let's just talk a little bit about today's exploits and vulnerabilities. Process and people remain the weakest link in our security defenses. From our standpoint, we're one of the most sought-after targets in the world. Level 3 is increasingly a target for very sophisticated multi-vector attacks, and the attackers are very persistent. So social engineering and phishing, the classic line was you get an email with typos in it. It was very easy to identify that you had been phished by someone. It was easy to put it aside. But the attacks are becoming increasingly sophisticated, with the attackers trying to learn as much as they can about your employees online. So they're becoming targeted, and they're doing spear phishing to seek out employees who have access to critical areas of your infrastructure, critical areas of your company in terms of the vulnerabilities we just discussed. And we saw one attack in particular recently where a Ukraine-based cybercrime syndicate that was run by a former silver medalist weightlifter from Russia. So it's a former Olympian who's now running a cybercrime division inside of a Russian or a Ukrainian syndicate. That company is dedicated to attacking telcos and tech companies. They're increasingly trying to break into CDNs. They identified a customer of a CDN who was trying to upload their content in HTTP, not in HTTPS, and they were able to plant an employee inside of that company who was able to take and put a device on their network that was able to inject that HTTP upload to the CDN provider's origin server with malware. And that particular content provider became unknowingly the distributor of malware. We were able to see that attack happening. It's not always obvious where the traffic is coming from, where it's going to, but having the ability to look at a customer's network holistically is becoming increasingly important in identifying some of these more sophisticated attacks. So that really is a blended attack in itself, and the persistence that's demonstrated there is extreme. Another good example, we discovered an actor who was using fake driver's license records and actually using those to get access to transfer records, DNS records with the registrar, and then taking over those DNS records and pointing those to domains that would deliver malware and setting the TTLs extra long. So even after the attack was discovered, the TTLs were out there in existence throughout the internet for quite some time. So in terms of developing an approach to protecting yourself, you kind of have to take and make a very consistent investment across your assets. You want to understand what it is that you're actually trying to protect. So you need to understand all of the players who help you deliver your front end, what their hosting posture is. You need to ensure that they have centralized security policies that they're executing throughout their organization, and that they maintain segmentation within their systems. And I'll talk a little bit more about segmentation in a minute, what that means, but it's incredibly important that as you're looking at vendors who are going to assist you in content delivery and in hosting, that you really understand what their posture is. You need to have a strong inventory of your data and your systems, your applications, and any shadow IT applications that live within your organization. You want to make sure you understand the importance of your intellectual property, so be able to rank your assets in relative importance to the people who want to attack you. And then you need to understand who has access and how they have access to those systems and to that data. The security measures that you would want to employ as a baseline: segmentation. You do not want to have a flat network. You need to separate your enterprise network, where you keep all of your enterprise systems, from your content delivery network and from your content production workflows. So that's users and systems and networks. It's also passwords. You need to have the facilities to sandbox any new applications that you want to bring into your environment before you introduce them to your production environment. Obviously, you want to be using content encryption and HTTPS so that what you're actually doing is not visible without significant effort from the attackers. And then perhaps most importantly is you need a consistency of approach across your whole ecosystem. So again, with our biggest vulnerability coming from insiders, we have to have HR policies in place that allow us to, for example, when an employee is let go, shut off their access to all systems that they have access to at that time. Simple procedures to follow when you're exiting employees, and extensive procedures to follow when you're bringing employees in, and the ability to monitor traffic from each and every location in your network, and perhaps most importantly, the ability to view any traffic that's being exfiltrated from your network are just critical requirements. So let me just talk a little bit about what you should expect from your network service provider. As you're looking at your hosting facilities, as you're looking at your CDN providers, you're looking at your own data center locations, physical security is absolutely key. The ability to get access to any of your equipment is an incredible risk and an incredible opportunity for someone who wants to hack you. Establishing network controls that can be activated while you're under attack is critical. Establishing network controls for and a remediation process that you work out in advance with your suppliers is a best practice. DDoS protection has become relatively common. There's a lot of different types of DDoS protection out there, almost too many options and too many choices for you to make good decisions. I would argue you want to be looking for DDoS protection that occurs upstream of your localized equipment, so that you can get the benefit of greater amount of bandwidth. With these attacks increasingly growing in size, it's very easy for DDoS attacks these days to overrun your last mile of connectivity to your infrastructure. So you need to be looking for your network provider to supply that. Increasingly adding origin security into the mix and ensuring that you have network-based security out in front of that. Web application firewalls and secure internet gateways can be used to secure and control communication paths for your application, and can be used to increase the level of monitoring at the firewall that you're actually doing. And then finally, you need a provider who's ready to take action as you're coming under attack. So again, having an action plan in place with your provider that spells out what the proper procedures would be as you discover that you will be attacked or discover that you are being attacked. You're going to want to have threat intelligence that's actionable. You're going to want to have a provider who's able to look after your IP address space and be able to understand what sorts of malicious activity are occurring before an attack, and certainly then during attack, and using that information to mitigate those situations. So I'll open it up a bit for discussion. Any questions in the audience?
So the biggest cause of DDoS is spoofed packets on the internet, and Level 3 is in a unique position as a very large backbone provider to be able to do ingress filtering to prevent that from even hitting the internet. Are you fully BCP38 compliant?
So the question was, Level 3 has a very deep presence on the internet, and that the most common source of attack traffic from a DDoS is spoofed packets. And the question was, are we in a position to filter this protocol?
So that's actually a best current practice 38.
Best practice 38?
It's a little shorthand for ingress filtering.
Yeah. So I think the short answer is, well, I'm going to give you the long answer, actually. So we spend an incredible amount of time identifying where the command and control centers are. When a customer is under attack, we will certainly employ the filtering that's required to help them, whether that's spoof packets or a botnet that's been compromised and is levying more normal-looking traffic attacks. Certainly identifying spoof packets and identifying packets where there's something obviously wrong with them is fairly easy. But our focus in research, threat research, is really on the command and control centers and identifying those folks and taking them offline. Reacting to attacks is definitely something that we do, and if customers want to have, because an increasing percentage of attacks are persistent, just ongoing. I think it was something like 6% in 2013, moving to 13% of attacks being considered persistent and ongoing. We will put in place permanent filtering on our routers to support customers' defense. So I think the answer is yes. It goes beyond spoof packets. And again, our focus isn't just on shutting down the denial of service attack, but it's actually on threat research that leads us to the command and control heads of those botnets, and then working with law enforcement to prevent those folks from controlling their network from the locations they're in, and then ultimately pursuing legal action if the government wants to take action with them. So we spend a lot of time chasing them around proactively, trying to prevent them from having access to their network. We also notify customers when we identify that their hosts have been compromised. So we'll proactively go out and let customers know when we see significant amounts of malicious traffic coming from their address space. More questions in the room? Yeah.
So slightly different focus. We've seen a lot of growth in advertising revenue from online video. Correspondingly, there's a lot of growth in people stealing the streams and putting them on different landing pages so that they get the ad revenue, whereas the original folks pay the hosting fees. Do you have any mechanisms in place to cure that?
Yes. Yes, we do. I'm going to have a hard time getting into the details to explain them at exactly the level, but it's pretty rudimentary to enforce host authentication against the stream. I don't know if anyone else in the audience might want to comment on that. We can certainly follow up later in more detail. Thanks. All right, any other questions from the audience? All right, I'll end exactly on time at 3:15. Thanks very much for your time.